Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of a house that felt more like a mausoleum than a home. Cardboard boxes scraped across imported Italian marble. A marriage was ending, not with a screaming match, but with the pathetic thud of a suitcase hitting a wet driveway. A husband stood in the doorway, convinced he had just won the war by discarding the woman he deemed dead weight. Tomorrow, he would learn exactly who owned the ground he stood on. Zipping the nylon suitcase required a violent jerk of the wrist. Fabric caught in the metal teeth, snagging the sleeve of a faded gray sweater. Courtney wrenched the zipper backward, her fingers slipping on the cheap metal. Sweat pricked her hairline despite the chill of the air conditioning blowing directly from the vent above. The walk-in closet smelled oppressively of cedar panels and Liam's signature bergamot cologne, a sharp citrus scent that now settled heavy and sour in the back of her throat. Leaning against the door frame, Liam watched her struggle. Ice clinked against the sides of his heavy crystal tumbler. The amber liquid inside caught the harsh, recessed lighting of the closet. He took a slow sip, swallowing audibly in the quiet cavern of the room. "Make sure you leave the Cartier watch," Liam said, his voice flat, devoid of any ragged edge. "You didn't buy it, and frankly, it never really suited your wrist anyway." Courtney didn't look up. Bile rose in her stomach, sharp and acidic, but she swallowed it down. Her hand shook, a humiliating, involuntary tremor that she tried to hide by shoving a pile of cotton t-shirts into the remaining space of the bag. She wasn't crying. There was no grand, cinematic weeping. Instead, her nose was running, and a dull, throbbing ache pulsed behind her left eye. It felt less like a heartbreak and more like recovering from a severe flu. "It's on the nightstand," Courtney muttered, her voice gravelly and dry. "Good." Liam shifted his weight, the soles of his Italian leather loafers squeaking faintly against the hardwood border of the carpet. "I don't want to make this uglier than it has to be, Courtney. We just grew apart. I need someone who fits into this life. You still look like you're waiting for a bus in the rain." Snapping the suitcase shut, Courtney finally stood up. Her knees popped in the quiet room. She looked at him. Liam's hair was perfectly styled, not a strand out of place. He wore a crisp navy button-down, untucked just enough to look casually wealthy. He looked like a stranger, a perfectly curated mannequin occupying a house that felt entirely hostile. Grabbing the handle of the suitcase, she dragged it toward the doorway. The plastic wheels caught on the edge of the plush rug, forcing her to yank it hard. Liam didn't step back. He forced her to squeeze past him, their shoulders brushing. His shirt felt stiff and cold against her bare arm. "Leave the keys on the kitchen island," Liam called out as she made her way down the sweeping, unnecessary staircase. Marble steps felt icy through her thin socks and worn canvas sneakers. Every step amplified the hollow scrape of the suitcase wheels behind her. The mansion was vast, a sterile monument to Liam's newfound tech industry success. Walls painted in a shade of white called alabaster were devoid of art, mostly because Liam couldn't decide what kind of painting signaled the right tax bracket. The silence in the house was deafening, broken only by the rhythmic tapping of rain hitting the massive skylight above the foyer. Reaching the kitchen, Courtney unclipped the heavy ring of keys from her lanyard. The metal keys clattered loudly against the pristine white quartz countertop. For a fleeting second, she stared at them. The electronic fob for the gates, the heavy brass key for the front door, keys to a kingdom built on an illusion she had quietly orchestrated. A bitter, jagged laugh threatened to spill from her lips, but she bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted copper. Walking to the front door, the heavy oak felt immovable. She had to use both hands and her body weight to pull it open. The moment the seal broke, a gust of wet, freezing wind slapped her across the face. Rain blew into the foyer, spotting the marble floor with dark droplets. Stepping out into the storm, Courtney didn't look back. The heavy door clicked shut behind her, the automatic deadbolt engaging with a final, electronic thud. Rain instantly soaked through her thin jacket, plastering her hair to her forehead. The driveway seemed 10 miles long, a winding stretch of expensive crushed gravel that made rolling her suitcase impossible. She had to lift the heavy, awkward bag by the handle, her shoulders screaming in protest as she trudged toward the iron gates. Water pooled in her shoes. Her toes went numb. Parked just outside the perimeter, her ancient Honda Civic looked like a discarded toy beneath the glow of the amber street lamp. Fumbling with her frozen fingers, she finally managed to unlock the car, tossing the wet suitcase onto the passenger seat. The interior smelled of old receipts, stale peppermint, and damp upholstery. She slid into the driver's seat, slamming the door against the storm, shutting out the sight of the glowing mansion on the hill. Turning the key, the engine sputtered, coughed, and finally caught. Courtney rested her forehead against the cold, hard plastic of the steering wheel. The heater blew lukewarm air that smelled faintly of exhaust. She sat there for a long time, watching the wipers smear rainwater across the cracked windshield, listening to the erratic thumping of her own heart. Fluorescent lights buzzed with an angry, electrical hum inside the Starlight Diner. The sign outside was missing 3 letters, glowing a sickly neon pink that bled through the heavy rain. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of burnt hash browns, bleach, and old coffee. Sitting in a vinyl booth near the back, Courtney traced a deep scratch in the faux wood formica table. The vinyl seat was duct-taped at the seams, the adhesive sticky against the back of her jeans. Her clothes were still damp, clinging uncomfortably to her skin and making her shiver uncontrollably in the air-conditioned diner. A waitress with chipped red nail polish and a name tag that read Barb slid a thick ceramic mug onto the table. Dark liquid sloshed over the rim, pooling in the saucer. "Need anything else, hon?" Barb asked, chewing a piece of gum with mechanical rhythm. "No, just the coffee. Thank you." Courtney's voice cracked. Barb gave her a knowing, pitying look, the kind reserved for women sitting alone in diners at 2 a.m. with wet hair and a suitcase before walking away to wipe down the counter. Wrapping her cold, stiff hands around the mug, Courtney let the heat seep into her palms. The coffee tasted terrible, like copper and burnt dirt. But it was hot. She took a slow sip, letting the bitter liquid coat her throat. Reaching into her jacket pocket, she pulled out her phone. The screen was cracked in the bottom left corner, a spider web of glass that distorted the time. 2:14 a.m. battery at 12%. For 5 years, Courtney had played a part. She had desperately wanted to build a life independent of the suffocating, controlling shadow of her family's wealth. When she met Liam, he was an ambitious but broke developer with a pitch deck and a chip on his shoulder. She loved his drive. She loved that he saw her as a struggling graphic designer, someone entirely unremarkable. She had hidden her last name, her trust fund, and her father's sprawling empire, terrified that money would poison the one genuine connection she thought she had found. But as Liam's company struggled, His ego began to fracture. To save him, to save them. Courtney had quietly crossed the line she swore she never would. She made a call. A month later, Liam's startup received a massive injection of venture capital from Apex Holdings. A year later, a mysterious real estate subsidiary offered Liam a sprawling mansion on a lease-to-own agreement that was practically giving the house away. Liam thought he was a genius. He thought his sheer brilliance had charmed the notoriously ruthless private equity firm. Success didn't soften Liam. It mutated him. The money fed his arrogance, turning him into a hollow, cruel caricature of the man she married. And tonight, he had kicked her out of the very house her father's shell company owned, firing her from a life she had secretly funded. Staring at the dim screen of her phone, Courtney opened her contacts. She scrolled past Liam's name, past a few estranged college friends, and stopped on a contact simply labeled RH. Her thumb hovered over the call button. Nausea rolled through her again. Calling this number meant admitting defeat. It meant stepping back into the cage she had spent her early 20s clawing her way out of. But as a violent shiver racked her spine, the reality of her damp clothes and the empty checking account Liam had drained earlier that week settled in. She pressed dial and lifted the cracked glass to her ear. The phone rang twice. "I told my secretary I wasn't taking calls until 6. The voice on the other end was a low, gravelly baritone, rough like sandpaper sliding over steel. "It's not your secretary," Courtney said, her voice dropping to a whisper. A long, heavy silence stretched across the line. The background noise on his end vanished, leaving only the faint, staticky hiss of the connection. "Courtney." The name sounded unfamiliar in his mouth, weighed down by years of stubborn silence. "I need a favor," she forced the words out, staring hard at the pooling coffee in her saucer to keep the tears from finally falling. You always said if I was done playing normal, I could call. Where are you?" The tone shifted instantly from corporate irritation to cold, calculated focus. "I'm at a diner on Route 9. Liam, he locked me out. He told me to leave." Another silence. This one was different. It felt dense, heavy with a quiet, terrifying violence. "He kicked you out?" The gravel in the voice sharpened into a razor edge. "Out of the house on Ridgeview?" "Yes." Courtney squeezed her eyes shut. "I just need a hotel room for the night. My cards are bouncing." He emptied the joint account. "Drink your coffee, Courtney," the man said, his voice dropping an octave, settling into a terrifyingly calm register. "A car will be there in 10 minutes. The driver will have a dry coat and cash." "Dad, I don't want a scene." "There won't be a scene," Rowley interrupted smoothly. "Just a minor correction in the paperwork. Get warm. I'll handle the rest." The line went dead. Courtney lowered the phone to the table. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered, buzzing loudly, but for the first time all night, her hands had stopped shaking. Sunlight pierced the gaps in the motorized blackout blinds, casting sharp, blinding stripes across the massive California king bed. Liam stretched, kicking his legs out until his bare feet brushed the edge of the mattress. He groaned, a deep sound of satisfaction, and rolled over onto his back. The 800 thread count Egyptian cotton sheets felt cool and smooth against his skin. The house was incredibly quiet. No sound of the shower running in the guest bathroom. No smell of burnt toast drifting up from the kitchen. No Courtney. Sitting up, Liam rubbed the sleep from his eyes. A smug smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. He felt expansive, lighter. Shedding Courtney had been a long time coming. She was a relic from a time when he was nobody, a constant nagging reminder of cheap apartments and ramen noodles. Now, he was the CEO of a tech company valued at $50 million. He drove a Porsche. He wore bespoke suits. Having a wife who bought her clothes at thrift stores and looked uncomfortable at charity galas was bad for his brand. Swinging his legs out of bed, his feet hit the heated marble floor of the master suite. He padded into the bathroom, turning on the rainfall shower. The bathroom filled with thick, luxurious steam and the sharp, clean scent of eucalyptus body wash. Standing under the scalding water, he mentally mapped out his day. A meeting with the board at 10, a lunch with a new investor at noon. Maybe he'd call that marketing director, Sarah, the one who kept laughing a little too loudly at his jokes. Stepping out of the shower, he wrapped a thick towel around his waist and walked down the sweeping staircase. The house looked better in the morning light. It looked victorious. In the kitchen, he approached the massive stainless steel espresso machine. It hummed softly as he ground the expensive single-origin beans. He watched the dark, rich liquid pour into the small porcelain cup, inhaling the bitter, chocolatey aroma. Taking a sip, the caffeine hit his system, sharp and perfect. Ding dong, Liam paused, the cup halfway to his mouth. The doorbell was a deep, resonant chime that echoed through the empty foyer. He frowned, glancing at the digital clock on the oven. 8:15 a.m. Too early for a package delivery. Too early for friends. Not that he had many left who would drop by unannounced. Setting the espresso cup down on the quartz counter, he tightened the towel around his waist and walked toward the front doors. Through the frosted glass side panels, he could make out the silhouettes of two men standing on the porch. Unlocking the deadbolt, he pulled the heavy oak door open. Two men stood on the welcome mat. They were impeccably dressed in dark, tailored suits that looked like they cost more than Liam's first car. The man on the left was older, with silver hair pulled tightly back and a face carved out of granite. The man on the right was younger, holding a thick, leather-bound folder. Neither of them smiled. "Can I help you?" Liam asked, leaning against the door frame, trying to project casual authority despite standing there in a damp towel. "Liam Mercer?" the older man asked. His voice was clipped, professional, and utterly devoid of warmth. "That's me. Who are you? If this is about the homeowners association, I already told the board." "We are not from the homeowners association," the older man interrupted smoothly. He gestured to the younger man, who flipped open the leather folder and withdrew a thick stack of legal documents printed on heavy, cream-colored parchment. "I am Arthur Vance, senior counsel for Apex Holdings," the older man continued, holding out a silver pen. "You need to sign these acknowledging receipt." Liam blinked, the remnants of sleep vanishing instantly. Apex Holdings, his primary investors, the firm that had essentially bought his company and set him up in this house. His heart did a strange, irregular thump against his ribs. "Apex? What's this about? Is there an issue with the quarterly reports? Because I have a meeting with the board at 10. "There is no meeting at 10, Mr. Mercer," Arthur said, his eyes scanning Liam's disheveled appearance with naked contempt. "You have been removed as CEO of Mercer Technologies, effective at 6 a.m. this morning by a unanimous vote from the Shadow Board." Liam's jaw went slack. The cold air from the porch bit into his bare chest. "Removed? You can't remove me. I founded the company. I own 40%. You owned 40%. the younger man corrected, stepping forward to hand Liam the papers. The paper felt heavy, thick, and rough against Liam's damp fingers. As per the morality and conduct clause in your founding agreement, a clause triggered by hostile domestic actions detrimental to the primary shareholders' interests, your shares have been forcibly bought out at their initial valuation, 10 cents a share. Hostile domestic actions? Liam's voice cracked, sounding shrill and panicked in the quiet morning air. What are you talking about? Who is the primary shareholder? Arthur tilted his head slightly, a shark looking at a bleeding fish. The sole owner of Apex Holdings, and by extension the holding company that owns this property, is Raleigh West. Liam stared blankly. Raleigh West? The real estate billionaire? I've never even met him. No, Arthur said softly, but you did marry his daughter. The silence that followed was absolute. Only the distant sound of a lawnmower broke the quiet. Liam looked down at the papers. His eyes swam over the dense legal jargon, catching on a single line near the bottom of the first page. Beneficiary and primary proxy, Courtney West. Courtney, her last name is Miller, Liam whispered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. The memory of the cheap nylon suitcase, her worn sneakers, the way she carefully avoided talking about her family in Ohio. Courtney West utilized her mother's maiden name to maintain privacy, Arthur stated flatly. A privacy you severely underestimated. Now, regarding the property. Arthur checked a heavy gold watch on his wrist. This house is owned by an Apex subsidiary. As you are no longer affiliated with the company, your lease is terminated immediately. You have exactly 30 minutes to vacate the premises before we consider you a trespasser and involve local law enforcement. 30 minutes? Liam gasped, taking a step back as the sheer magnitude of the collapse hit him. His legs felt like wet sand. I can't pack my life in 30 minutes. This is my house. It was never your house, Mr. Mercer, Arthur said, his tone finally dripping with a terrifying, icy satisfaction. And I believe your wife managed to pack her belongings in 10. We are affording you a generous extension. The younger man reached out, gently but firmly taking the front door handle from Liam's loose grip. Your time starts now, Arthur said. The heavy oak door was pulled shut, stopping just inches from closing completely. Oh, and Mr. Mercer? Arthur's voice drifted through the crack. Leave the espresso machine. You didn't buy it. Panic tasted like copper and stale espresso. Ripping the towel from his waist, Liam scrambled up the sweeping staircase, his wet feet slipping dangerously on the polished marble. His chest heaved, pulling in ragged, shallow breaths. 30 minutes. 30 minutes to pack a life that was supposed to last forever. Reaching the master bedroom, the sheer scale of the space suddenly felt mocking. Where to even begin? Tearing open the walk-in closet doors, the scent of cedar and his own lingering cologne hit him like a physical blow. Row upon row of custom-tailored suits hung in pristine uniformity. Reaching for a charcoal gray Armani jacket, his hand froze. Did I buy this? Nausea rolled through his gut. The company card. He had expensed almost everything. The suits, the watches, the golf clubs in the garage. Apex Holdings owned Mercer Technologies, and Mercer Technologies owned the lifestyle of Liam Mercer. Grabbing a canvas gym bag from the top shelf, he began shoving items inside with blind, frantic violence. T-shirts, underwear, a pair of worn jeans from 5 years ago that he had kept hidden in the back. Fabric tore as a zipper caught, mirroring the exact struggle Courtney had endured 12 hours prior. Sweat beaded on his forehead, stinging his eyes. Desperation forced him to grab his phone from the nightstand. His fingers trembled so violently, he misdialed twice before finally connecting to Greg, his chief operations officer. Ringing echoed in his ear. 1, 2, 3. "Greg, thank God," Liam barked the moment the line clicked open. "Listen, there's some kind of hostile takeover happening. Apex is trying to force me out. I need you to call the board, rally the remaining founders." "Liam," Greg's voice was flat, devoid of the usual sycophantic warmth. "I am the new acting CEO. Apex appointed me at 6:30 this morning." Silence hung heavy and suffocating in the bedroom. You sold me out?" Liam's voice cracked, sounding pathetic even to his own ears. "You were a liability," Greg sighed, the sound crackling with static. "You alienated the engineering team, you blew through the marketing budget on vanity projects, and apparently you pissed off the single largest private equity firm in the hemisphere by throwing your wife out into the rain. I have a mortgage, Liam. Do not call this number again." Click. Tossing the phone onto the unmade bed, Liam let out a primal, strangled sound. It wasn't a sob. It was a choked gasp of pure, unadulterated terror. The walls of the alabaster mansion were closing in. Downstairs, the heavy grandfather clock chimed the quarter hour. 15 minutes left. Rushing to the ensuite bathroom, his reflection caught him off guard in the massive vanity mirror. Pale, wide-eyed, stripped of the smug certainty that had defined his features just an hour ago. He looked like a scared child. Grabbing his toothbrush and a half-empty bottle of generic aspirin, he threw them into a leather toiletry bag. Footsteps echoed from the ground floor, heavy, deliberate, marching on the hardwood. "Mr. Mercer," Arthur's voice drifted up the staircase, polite but firm. "Your time is running short. Building security has arrived to assist you with your exit." Clutching the single overstuffed canvas bag to his chest, Liam stood in the center of the master suite. This was his kingdom, his reward for being brilliant, for being ruthless. Now, it was just a house he was trespassing in. Dressing rapidly in a pair of wrinkled slacks and a plain white button-down, he didn't bother with socks. Slipping his bare feet into loafers, he grabbed his car keys off the dresser. At least he had the Porsche. He had put the down payment on that himself before the major Apex funding. Descending the stairs, his legs felt like damp wood. Two large men in dark tactical windbreakers stood in the foyer, their arms crossed. Arthur watched from the doorway, holding a clipboard. "Keys to the property on the kitchen island, please," Arthur instructed, pointing the tip of his silver pen toward the quartz counter. Dropping the house keys onto the stone surface, Liam winced at the loud, final clatter. He walked toward the front door, keeping his eyes fixed on the driveway. The rain had stopped, leaving the morning air crisp and smelling of wet asphalt and pine needles. Pressing the unlock button on his key fob, Liam waited for the familiar orange flash of the Porsche's headlights. Nothing happened. Pressing it again, harder this time, his thumb ached. Still nothing. "If you are attempting to locate the vehicle leased under Mercer Technologies," Arthur said smoothly, stepping out onto the porch. "It was repossessed at 4 this morning. A tow truck quietly removed it from the street. You'll find an Uber waiting at the bottom of the hill. It has been paid for." Standing frozen on the slate porch, Liam stared at the empty patch of driveway where his car used to be. The canvas bag slipped from his shoulder, hitting the ground with a soft, pathetic thud. A cold breeze cut through his thin shirt, raising goosebumps on his arms. Yesterday, he was a titan of industry. Today, he was a homeless man waiting for a rideshare. Sunlight filtered through the sheer silk curtains of the penthouse suite at the street. Regis, painting warm golden rectangles across the plush carpet. Courtney lay perfectly still on top of the covers. Her clothes from the night before, stiff with dried rainwater and smelling faintly of diner grease, were folded neatly on a velvet armchair in the corner. She wore an oversized, impossibly soft white robe provided by the hotel, but she felt entirely exposed. Silence in this room felt different from the silence in Liam's mansion. That had been a hollow, echoing void. This silence was insulated, expensive, designed to keep the noise of the city completely at bay. Rolling onto her side, the mattress barely shifted. It was too soft, lacking the firm, familiar dip of the old mattress she and Liam had shared in their first cramped apartment. A sharp pang of grief hit her, swift and unexpected. She wasn't mourning the Liam who threw her out. She was mourning the boy who used to split a single slice of pizza with her on the floor of a studio apartment, laughing about how they would conquer the world together. Knocking on the heavy mahogany door broke her reverie. 3 sharp, rhythmic raps. Sitting up, Courtney ran a hand through her tangled hair. Her scalp ached. "Come in." The door clicked open, and Raleigh West stepped into the suite. He looked exactly the same as he had 10 years ago. Silver hair, impeccably groomed, a tailored charcoal suit that fit like armor, and eyes the color of winter ice. He brought the scent of ozone, black coffee, and expensive leather into the room with him. Walking over to the small glass dining table near the window, he set down a sleek leather folio. He didn't rush to hug her. The West family didn't do messy, emotional reunions. They dealt in logistics. Room service should be bringing up a pot of Earl Grey and some toast in 5 minutes, Raleigh said, his deep, gravelly voice filling the massive suite effortlessly. He pulled out a chair and sat, crossing one leg over the other. "Did you sleep?" "No," Courtney admitted, pulling the thick robe tighter around her chest. She stood up, her bare feet sinking into the carpet, and walked toward the window. Below her, the city buzzed with morning traffic, tiny cars moving in organized lines. "What did you do, Dad?" Raleigh unclasped the leather folio, smoothing a page flat. "I corrected a misallocation of assets." Turning around, Courtney crossed her arms. "I just asked for a hotel room. I needed $50 for a cab and a place to sleep. That's all." "And leave you married to a man who thinks he can discard my daughter into a thunderstorm?" Raleigh let out a low, humorless chuckle. "Courtney, you spent 5 years playing house with a mediocrity who believed he was a genius. You funneled my capital to him. You built his little empire from the shadows to protect his fragile ego, and the moment he felt secure, he tried to erase you." "I loved him," she whispered, the admission tasting like sour milk. "You loved a project," Raleigh corrected smoothly, not a hint of malice in his voice, only absolute certainty. "You picked a stray dog, fed it, trained it, and acted surprised when it bit you the moment you stopped holding the leash." Tears pricked the corners of Courtney's eyes, but anger quickly burned them away. "You didn't have to ruin him. You didn't have to take the company." I didn't take anything that wasn't legally mine, Raleigh replied, tapping a manicured finger against the documents on the table. Apex Holdings owned 70% of Mercer Technologies. We owned the patent for the software he claimed to have coded single-handedly. We owned the lease on that absurd McMansion he picked out. I simply called in the chips. How fast? Courtney asked, dread pooling in her stomach. By the time you finished your coffee at that diner, his board had voted him out. By sunrise, his accounts were frozen, pending an audit of company expenses. 10 minutes ago, security escorted him off the Ridgeview property. Raleigh leaned back, steepling his fingers. He is currently sitting in the back of an Uber, realizing that his entire existence was a courtesy extended by the woman he threw away. A sickening jolt hit Courtney's chest. It was a chaotic mix of profound vindication and absolute horror. This was why she had run away at 22, this terrifying godlike power her father wielded casually over breakfast. Raleigh didn't just win fights. He obliterated the battlefield so his opponent had nowhere to stand. Walking over to the table, she pulled out a chair and sank into it. The leather was cold against the back of her legs. She looked at her father, seeing the lines of age around his eyes, the subtle tightening of his jaw. He hadn't just done this for business. He was furious. "He has nothing?" she asked softly. "He has the clothes on his back and whatever he managed to shove into a bag," Raleigh confirmed. "And his ego, though I imagine that is currently deflating." Room service knocked lightly on the door, interrupting the heavy silence. A waiter in a crisp white jacket wheeled in a silver cart, arranging a delicate porcelain teapot, a plate of toast, and small jars of jam on the table before quietly retreating. Pouring the tea, the delicate scent of bergamot wafted up with the steam. Courtney flinched. It was the exact same scent as Liam's cologne. Pushing the cup away, she rested her forehead in her hands. "So, what now? I go back to being the heiress. I attend board meetings and smile at charity galas. I get back in the cage?" Raleigh reached across the table, his large, rough hand covering hers. It was a rare, startling gesture of physical affection. His grip was warm, grounding her in the present. "You were never in a cage, Courtney. You just refused to learn how to fly the plane, so you jumped out without a parachute." He squeezed her hand slightly. "You built a $50 million tech company from a dingy apartment while letting an idiot take all the credit. You negotiated the Apex funding flawlessly under an alias. You aren't a graphic designer waiting for a bus in the rain." Releasing her hand, Raleigh tapped the leather folio. "Mercer Technologies needs a new CEO. The board is currently rudderless. Greg is a competent manager, but he lacks vision." Raleigh locked eyes with her, his gaze intense and unyielding. "It's your company, Courtney. It always was. The question is, are you finally ready to put your own name on the building?" Staring at the documents, the dense legal text blurred in front of her. Fear warred with a sudden, intoxicating rush of adrenaline. For 5 years, she had made herself small so Liam could feel big. She had swallowed her opinions, hidden her intellect, and played the supportive, quiet wife. Reaching across the table, she didn't grab the tea. She grabbed the silver pen resting next to the folio. "If I take it," Courtney said, her voice dropping the wavering tremor, hardening into a tone that perfectly mirrored the man sitting across from her. "Apex backs off. No shadow board. No puppet strings. I run it my way." A slow, genuine smile spread across Raleigh West's face. It was a terrifying, beautiful thing to witness. "Deal," he said softly. Clicking the pen open, Courtney pulled the contract toward her. The ink flowed dark and permanent across the heavy parchment. She signed her real name for the first time in 5 years. Courtney West. The girl Liam Mercer threw out was dead. The woman who funded him had just clocked in. Rainwater from the morning storm still clung to the hem of Liam's trousers, leaving dark, damp rings on the faded floral carpet of room 114. The Sunray Motel sat off a noisy stretch of Interstate 88, a brutalist concrete structure painted a peeling shade of mustard yellow. The air inside the room smelled aggressively of industrial bleach, trying and failing to mask decades of stale cigarette smoke. Sitting on the edge of a mattress that sagged heavily in the middle, Liam stared at the glowing screen of his phone. Error. Account frozen. Please contact your branch administrator. He closed the banking app. He opened it again. He typed his password, his thumb shaking so badly he hit the wrong numbers twice. Error. Account frozen. A heavy, suffocating weight pressed down on his chest. It felt physical, like someone had stacked cinder blocks on his sternum. He unbuttoned the collar of his crisp white shirt, the fabric suddenly feeling abrasive against his neck. The canvas gym bag sat on the floor near his feet, looking small and pathetic. It contained 3 t-shirts, some underwear, a toothbrush, and a bottle of aspirin. That was the sum total of his net worth. Scrolling through his contacts, his breathing turned shallow and rapid. Todd. He could call Todd. They played squash every Thursday at the athletic club. Todd was a VP at a logistics startup. He had a massive guest house in the hills. Liam pressed the call button. The phone rang 4 times before bumping to voicemail. Todd, hey, it's Liam. Listen, man, crazy morning. Total misunderstanding with the board over at Mercer. I need a place to crash for a couple of days while my lawyers sort this out. Call me back. Hanging up, Liam's mouth tasted like copper. He knew Todd wouldn't call back. In their world, a frozen bank account and an ousted CEO were contagious diseases. You didn't invite that kind of failure into your guest house. He dialed Mark next. Then David. Then a venture capitalist named Brent, who had literally kissed him on the cheek at a gala 2 weeks ago. Voicemail. Voicemail. Disconnected line. Dropping the phone onto the scratchy polyester bedspread, Liam buried his face in his hands. The silence in the cheap motel room was maddening, broken only by the loud, rattling hum of the wall-mounted air conditioning unit kicking on. It blew lukewarm, dusty air directly onto his face. Desperation began to crack his carefully constructed reality. How had this happened so fast? He was the visionary. He was the one who stood on the stage at TechCrunch wearing a black turtleneck, talking about machine learning and algorithmic synergy. The investors had clapped. The tech blogs had called him a prodigy. Leaning over, he unzipped the front pocket of his bag and pulled out his silver laptop. He flipped it open. The screen flared to life, illuminating the dingy room. He opened a terminal window, staring at the blinking cursor. He needed to build something new. He needed to prove he didn't need Apex, or his company, or her. He placed his fingers on the keyboard. Nothing came. He stared at the blank screen, an icy tendril of dread curling in his stomach. The truth, stripped of the millions of dollars and the bespoke suits, was incredibly ugly. He hadn't written a functional line of code in 3 years. When the initial Mercer Tech prototype kept crashing, when the back-end logic refused to compile, He had thrown a coffee mug against the wall in their cramped apartment and gone to a bar. When he woke up the next morning, hungover and smelling of cheap beer, the code was fixed. The compiler ran flawlessly. Courtney had been sitting at the kitchen table, dark circles under her eyes, quietly drinking tea. She had told him she just found a typo in the array. He had believed her. He had wanted to believe her. It was easier to believe his wife was just being helpful rather than accepting she was fundamentally smarter than him. She had built the architecture. She had structured the database. He just put a sleek user interface on it and took it to pitch meetings. A ragged, ugly sound tore out of Liam's throat. A sob. It surprised him. He grabbed the cheap plastic ice bucket off the nightstand and hurled it across the room. It bounced harmlessly off the heavy CRT television, clattering to the floor. He wasn't a visionary. He was a mascot, and the owner of the team had just fired him. Falling backward onto the uncomfortable mattress, Liam stared at the water-stained acoustic tiles on the ceiling. His phone buzzed against the bedspread. Todd. He lunged for it, his heart leaping into his throat, swiping to accept the call before the second ring. Todd. Hey man, thanks for... Liam. Todd's voice was hushed, muffled, like he was speaking from inside a closet. I only have a second. I can't help you, man. Greg just sent out an industry-wide memo. He said you were terminated for gross misconduct and misappropriation of company funds. Apex is threatening litigation against anyone who attempts to transfer IP with you. That's a lie, Liam screamed, spittle flying onto the phone screen. I didn't misappropriate anything. It was my company. It's Apex, Liam. They own the valley. I can't be seen talking to you. Don't call this number again. The line went dead. Liam lay entirely still. The air conditioner rattled. The smell of bleach burned his nostrils. The cold, terrifying reality settled over him like a heavy woolen blanket. There was no comeback. There was no grand return. He was completely, irrevocably erased. Glass doors slid open with a soft, pneumatic hiss, welcoming Courtney into the expansive sunlit lobby of Mercer Technologies. The air inside smelled of expensive, dark roast coffee and the subtle ozone tang of server racks. She paused on the welcome mat. The last time she had been in this building, it was for the annual holiday party. She had worn a cheap, off-the-rack dress and stood quietly in the corner, holding a plastic cup of wine while Liam held court by the ice sculpture, explicitly ignoring her. Today, she wore a pair of tailored black trousers, a heavy cream silk blouse, and flat leather loafers that made absolutely no sound as she stepped onto the polished concrete floor. She carried no briefcase, no purse. Just a leather folio tucked under her arm. Her stomach churned, a volatile mixture of caffeine, adrenaline, and deep-seated imposter syndrome. For 5 years, her identity had been defined by shrinking, by taking up as little space as possible. Expanding now felt dangerous, like stretching muscles that had atrophied. She forced her shoulders down, took a slow breath of the conditioned air, and walked toward the reception desk. Sarah, the marketing director, who always laughed too loudly at Liam's jokes, was leaning over the reception counter, whispering frantically to the security guard. She froze as Courtney approached. "Mrs. Mercer?" Sarah blinked, her eyes darting to the heavy glass doors as if expecting Liam to walk in behind her. "Ms. West," Courtney corrected softly, her voice steady. "Is Greg in the executive suite?" Yes, but the suite is locked down. Only board members." I am the board, Sarah. Call up. Tell him I'm coming. Without waiting for a response, Courtney bypassed the reception desk and walked toward the glass elevators. She felt the eyes of the lobby staff burning into her back. The elevator arrived with a quiet ping. Stepping inside, she pressed the button for the top floor. The ride up was silent. She watched the floors of open-plan desks zip by through the glass walls. Hundreds of people, typing, talking, building things on an architecture she had designed in her pajamas at a kitchen table. The scale of it all finally hit her. This wasn't just a chess game against Liam. These were livelihoods. This was real. The doors parted on the executive floor. Greg was standing in the center of the hallway, flanked by two men in dark suits who looked remarkably similar to the lawyers who had evicted Liam that morning. Greg was sweating. Patches of dampness stained the armpits of his light blue dress shirt. He looked like a man who had been handed the keys to a Ferrari while speeding down a mountain road with no brakes. "Courtney," Greg said, stepping forward, a forced, nervous smile plastered across his face. Or, "Ms. West, Rowley called. We've been expecting you." "Greg." Courtney didn't smile. She didn't extend her hand. She walked straight past him toward the frosted glass doors at the end of the hall, the corner office. Greg scrambled to keep up, his leather shoes squeaking on the hardwood. "Listen, I want to assure you, the transition has been seamless. The engineers are calm, the servers are stable, and the PR team has already drafted the press release regarding Liam's departure." Courtney pushed open the heavy glass door of the CEO's office. The space was a monument to Liam's ego. A massive, reclaimed wood desk dominated the room. Behind it, floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city skyline. A crystal decanter of scotch sat on a side table next to an indoor putting green. The whiteboard on the far wall was covered in meaningless corporate buzzwords: synergy, disruptive paradigm, agile fluidity, written in Liam's messy, aggressive scrawl. The air in the room was heavy with the sharp citrus scent of bergamot cologne. Courtney felt a sudden wave of nausea. She walked directly to the windows and through the latch, pushing a glass panel open. The roar of city traffic and a gust of fresh, smoggy air rushed in, shattering the sterile silence of the room. "Get maintenance up here to remove the putting green," Courtney said, turning to face Greg. She pointed at the side table. "And pour that scotch down the sink. This is a technology firm, not a fraternity house." "Right away," Greg swallowed hard, pulling out his phone to send a message. Walking over to the massive desk, Courtney didn't sit in the heavy, ergonomic leather chair. Instead, she stood behind it, dropping the leather folio onto the wood surface. She looked at Greg. He was a smart man, a capable operations guy, but he was a survivor. He had enabled Liam for years because it paid well. "What is the status of the new predictive algorithm?" Courtney asked, crossing her arms. Greg blinked, clearly caught off guard. He had expected corporate posturing, not a technical audit. "The predictive model? It's lagging. The engineering team has been stuck on a data bottleneck for 3 weeks. Liam told them to just patch it for the quarterly review." "You can't patch a core logic failure," Courtney said, her voice dropping an octave, slipping effortlessly into the cadence of a developer. "If the array doesn't dynamically scale with the user input, the database will corrupt under load. Who is the lead engineer on that pod?" "Marcus," Greg stammered. "Bring Marcus here, now." 10 minutes later, A young man in a faded band t-shirt and thick-rimmed glasses stood nervously in the doorway. He looked entirely out of place in the executive suite. "You're Marcus?" Courtney asked, finally sitting down in the heavy leather chair. It was too big for her, but she didn't care. "Yes, ma'am." "Show me the bottleneck." Courtney swiveled a large monitor toward him and tossed him a wireless keyboard. Marcus looked at Greg, confused, then tentatively walked over and pulled up the code base. Lines of dense, colorful text scrolled rapidly across the black screen. "It's a memory allocation issue," Marcus explained, pointing a slightly trembling finger at the screen. "When the user data exceeds 10 terabytes, the sorting function chokes. We've tried rewriting the loop, but it just crashes the compiler." Courtney leaned forward, her eyes scanning the code. The nervous energy that had plagued her all morning vanished. This was her language. This was the dark, quiet space where she actually lived. She read the lines of logic, tracing the flow of data in her mind. "You're using a standard quicksort for a multi-dimensional array," Courtney murmured, reaching out and pulling the keyboard back toward her. "It's too heavy." Her fingers flew across the keys. The sharp plastic clacking filled the silent office. She deleted 20 lines of code, replacing them with a sleek custom sorting function she had theorized months ago, but never had the clearance to implement. "You need to segment the data before it hits the loop. Run a parallel merge sort on the back end, cache the results, and then feed it into the predictive model." Courtney hit the execute key. The screen blinked. The compiler ran. A green bar shot across the bottom of the monitor, finishing in less than 2 seconds. Status: stable. No bottlenecks detected. Marcus stared at the screen, his mouth slightly open. He looked from the monitor to Courtney, a profound shift occurring behind his thick glasses. The confusion was gone, replaced by sudden, absolute reverence. Who wrote that?" Marcus asked quietly. "I did," Courtney said, sliding the keyboard away. She looked up at Greg, who was staring at her as if she had just performed actual magic. "Clear my schedule for the rest of the week, Greg," Courtney said, opening her leather folio. "I want a full audit of every line of code committed in the last 2 years. If Liam touched it, rewrite it. We have a lot of garbage to take out." She didn't wait for them to leave. She pulled a pen from her pocket and began reviewing the HR files. The room no longer smelled like bergamot. It just smelled like work. Neon light from the motel sign filtered through the thin curtains, painting room 114 in intermittent flashes of sickly pink. Hunger gnawed at Liam's stomach, a sharp, hollow ache that rivaled the relentless throbbing in his temples. Pacing the narrow strip of faded floral carpet between the bed and the heavy CRT television, he felt entirely disconnected from his own body. Water dripped slowly from the bathroom faucet, each metallic plink echoing like a hammer strike against the cheap porcelain sink. $32. That was all he had found, tucked into the inner pocket of his canvas gym bag. Staring at the crumpled bills sitting on the particle board nightstand, a bitter laugh scraped its way up his throat. Yesterday, his lunch at Le Bernardin had cost 5 times that amount, effortlessly swiped onto a black corporate card. Today, those thin paper bills were the only barrier between him and absolute starvation. Grabbing his damp jacket, he shoved the money into his pocket and walked out into the biting evening air. Rain had started to fall again, a fine freezing mist that clung to his eyelashes and seeped instantly through his thin cotton shirt. Walking along the shoulder of Interstate 88, the roar of passing semi-trucks threw muddy spray against his slacks. Shivering violently, he tucked his chin to his chest. Every passing headlight illuminated the spectacular ruin of his life. Fluorescent lights of a nearby convenience store eventually pierced the gloom, buzzing with that same angry electrical hum he had heard in the diner just 24 hours ago. Pushing the heavy glass door open, a bell jingled cheerfully above his head. Warm air blasted his face, carrying the heavy synthetic smells of cherry slushies, rolling hot dogs, and industrial floor wax. Approaching the refrigerated aisle, his wet shoes squeaked loudly against the scuffed linoleum. Glass doors fogged with condensation hid rows of plastic-wrapped sandwiches. Reaching out, his fingers brushed the cold, damp plastic of a turkey and cheddar wedge. It felt dense and profoundly unappetizing, yet his mouth watered uncontrollably. Taking the sandwich and a lukewarm bottle of tap water to the front counter, he placed them down. $5.42, the cashier muttered, not looking up from a faded tabloid magazine. Pulling a damp $10 bill from his pocket, Liam handed it over. The transaction was agonizingly mundane. Nobody recognized him. Nobody cared that he was the visionary behind Mercer Technologies. To this bored teenager chewing blue bubble gum, he was just another soaking wet transient buying cheap food on a Tuesday night. Voices suddenly drifted in from the doorway. 3 young men wearing matching Patagonia fleece vests walked in, shaking rain from their hair. They smelled of expensive craft beer and startup money. "Did you see the Bloomberg alert?" one of them asked, grabbing a case of sparkling water from the cooler. Mercer Tech just cleared house. Total bloodbath. "Crazy," the tallest one replied, leaning against the counter. "I heard the founder was basically a fraud. The board found out he hadn't committed a single line of usable code in years. Apparently, some shadow developer built the entire core architecture." "Good riddance," the third scoffed, tapping his credit card against the payment terminal. "Guys like that poison the ecosystem. Total parasite." Standing by the exit, Liam froze. Heat flushed his neck, entirely at odds with the freezing rainwater dripping down his spine. His fists clenched so tightly, his fingernails dug painful half-moons into his palms. "I am Liam Mercer," he wanted to scream. "I built that company. I sat in the pitch meetings. I convinced the venture capitalists." Words died in his throat. A suffocating pressure settled over his chest. Looking at the 3 young men, he saw exactly what he used to be: arrogant, insulated, entirely convinced of his own mythological brilliance. If he spoke up now, they wouldn't bow to him. They would pity him. Or worse, they would laugh. Pushing the glass door open, Liam practically fled back into the freezing mist. Walking back to the motel, he tore the plastic off the sandwich. Biting into the cold, stale bread, it tasted like ash and cheap mustard. Tears finally spilled over his lower lids, hot and humiliating, mixing with the cold rain on his cheeks. He wasn't crying because he lost Courtney. He was crying because he finally realized she was the only real thing he had ever possessed. And he had thrown her away for a reflection in a funhouse mirror. Twilight descended over the city, turning the sprawling skyline into a jagged silhouette of steel and glass. Inside the executive suite of Mercer Technologies, the air was still, quiet, and smelling faintly of ozone and expensive green tea. Courtney sat behind the massive reclaimed wood desk. Pushing her reading glasses up the bridge of her nose, she traced the final lines of a legal document with the tip of a silver pen. The leather chair was still too large for her, but she no longer felt like a child wearing an adult's coat. The heavy, oppressive scent of Liam's bergamot cologne had finally been scrubbed from the air vents, replaced by the clean, neutral scent of conditioned air. Footsteps approached the frosted glass doors. A soft knock echoed through the quiet room. "Come in," Courtney called out, her voice calm and authoritative. Greg stepped into the office, holding a thin manila folder. He looked exhausted, the bags under his eyes dark and bruised, but his posture lacked the frantic, terrified energy of yesterday morning. "Last file of the day, Courtney," Greg said, placing the folder gently onto the edge of her desk. "It's a communication from legal aid, representing Liam." Silence stretched between them. Courtney stopped tapping her pen. Looking down at the cheap, standard-issue folder, it looked entirely out of place against the polished wood and her expensive leather folio. "Legal aid?" Courtney asked, raising an eyebrow. "He couldn't secure a private attorney?" "His accounts are frozen pending the embezzlement audit," Greg replied, shifting his weight uncomfortably. "He's asking for a preliminary severance package, just a basic buyout to avoid personal bankruptcy. He claims the sudden eviction left him entirely destitute." Opening the folder, Courtney scanned the single page inside. The legal jargon was sloppy, drafted quickly by an overworked public defender. Liam was asking for $50,000, a pittance, a fraction of what he used to spend on a single weekend trip to Aspen. Reading his name on the paper, a strange hollow sensation bloomed in her chest. For 5 years, Liam had been the center of her universe. She had managed his moods, curated his diet, written his code, and hidden her own brilliance just to keep him standing upright. Yesterday morning, he had looked at her with pure disgust and told her she looked like someone waiting for a bus in the rain. Contradictions warred inside her mind. The West family philosophy, her father's philosophy, dictated absolute destruction. Never leave an enemy with a sword, even a broken one. Rowley would shred this request, frame it, and hang it in the lobby as a warning. Reaching for the silver pen, Courtney felt the smooth, cold metal against her skin. Empathy tasted like a vulnerability, but cruelty tasted like poison. She didn't want to be Liam, discarding people when they lost their utility. But she also refused to be her father, crushing bone just to prove she had the jaw strength. "Approve a 6-month basic employee severance," Courtney said, writing the authorization code at the bottom of the page in sharp, decisive strokes. "Calculated at the rate of a junior developer. Attach a standard non-disclosure and non-compete agreement. If he speaks to the press or tries to launch a competing platform within 2 years, we claw it back." Greg blinked, clearly surprised. "You're paying him? After everything he did?" "I am paying for his silence and his absence," Courtney corrected, closing the folder and sliding it back across the desk. "He doesn't get to be a martyr. He just gets to be irrelevant. Process it tonight." "Yes, ma'am." Greg took the folder, offering a small, respectful nod before quietly leaving the office. Alone again, Courtney stood up and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. Below her, the city lights flickered to life, a sprawling, glowing grid of electricity and data. Her phone vibrated on the desk. Picking it up, the screen flashed a single initial, RH. Swiping to accept, she brought the phone to her ear. "I saw the ledger update," Rowley's gravelly voice rumbled through the speaker. "You authorized a payout. Softness is a liability, Courtney." "It's not softness, Dad. It's closure," Courtney replied, her tone matching his steady cadence perfectly. If I give him nothing, he spends the next 5 years nursing a grievance, trying to find a weak point in our armor. If I give him a junior developer's salary, I strip him of his narrative. He isn't a wronged founder anymore. He's just another terminated employee taking a buyout. A long, heavy pause hung on the line. The static hummed quietly. Practical, Raleigh finally conceded, a faint hint of genuine respect coloring his rough voice. You didn't inherit my temper. That's probably for the best. I inherited your pragmatism, Courtney said, leaning her forehead against the cool glass of the window. The code review is finished. We launch the new predictive model on Thursday. The board will get the revised projections by morning. Good work, CEO, Raleigh said smoothly. The line clicked dead. Lowering the phone, Courtney looked at her reflection in the dark glass. The woman staring back was unrecognizable from the girl dragging a cheap nylon suitcase down a wet driveway. Her hair was pulled back, her posture straight, her eyes sharp and terrifyingly clear. Wrapping her hands around her warm mug of tea, she took a slow sip. The dark liquid was strong, bitter, and entirely perfect. The storm was over, and the house she had secretly built finally belonged to her. If you felt the sheer satisfaction of that turnaround, hit the like button right now. Courtney's journey from a cold, rainy driveway to realizing the power she actually holds is just getting started. What do you think Liam will do next now that he's lost his company, his mansion, and his pride? Will he try to crawl back or make things worse? Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapters of this incredible story. Drop a comment below. Would you have handled it like Courtney did? Share this video with someone who loves satisfying drama.